The day I walked into that saloon, I was only looking for a moment of warmth and quiet. The kind of quiet a woman rarely gets in a town like ours, where dust chokes the streets and gossip rides faster than any horse. I wore black because I always had, not for any man, but because it made people look twice before asking stupid questions. People said I was a widow. I never corrected them. It was easier that way. The seamstress shop was stifling that morning. Too many bodies, too many corsets, too many opinions, so I untied my apron and walked out before the bell could even finish ringing. The sun hit me like a skillet. My shoes were cracked at the soles. I had exactly 17 cents in my pocket, and no idea why I thought a saloon would offer anything other than stares or spilled beer. But I pushed the doors open anyway, like I belonged there. Inside, it smelled like tobacco, sweat, and something fried too long ago. A group of ranch hands crowded a card table, laughing too loud, pretending luck had something to do with their lives. A piano sat in the corner, covered in dust thick enough to write a poem in. No one paid it any mind. I ordered coffee weak and burnt and took a seat where no one could get behind me. The men were halfway through their second bottle when one slammed down a winning hand and crowed like he'd conquered a country. I don't know what came over me, but I looked up and said, "If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you right here." The whole room froze. One man chuckled. Another shifted in his chair. The bartender raised an eyebrow. A few looked at me like I'd spoken in tongues. Then the laughter came uneasy, drawn out, like they weren't sure if I was joking or dangerous. That was the point. I didn't think so, I added, sipping my coffee. All hat, no harmony. A quiet scraped through the saloon like a cold wind. Then someone stood. He'd been sitting in the farthest corner, mostly shadow, nursing a glass of something amber. I hadn't noticed him before. Thin frame, sleeves rolled to his elbows, face like a man who'd seen too much but said too little. He walked slow, calm, like the floorboards weren't even worth creaking under him. He dusted off the piano bench with his hand, then sat down like he'd done it 1,000 times. For a second I almost wanted him to fail. I wanted it to be a joke. Another man pretending. Then he played. It wasn't perfect. Some notes missed, some lingered too long. But there was no mistaking it. He was playing Chopin. Not banging on keys like a drunk, but really playing. Something soft, mournful, deliberate. Like someone remembering something that hurt and holding it anyway. The card table went silent. Even the bartender stopped wiping glasses. And I forgot to breathe. That's the first time I saw him. Didn't know his name. Didn't know his story. Just knew that the music had fingers and they were wrapped around my ribs, squeezing something I thought I'd buried for good. When the last note fell away, no one clapped. Not out of disrespect, just reverence. Like we'd all stumbled into a chapel. We didn't know we were inside. The air had changed. The saloon suddenly felt too crude, too loud for what had just happened. He didn't look around for praise. Just stood, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, and returned to his table like it was no big thing. Like he hadn't just cracked something open in me I didn't know was still alive. Then the doors burst open. A skinny boy, no more than 10, ran in with mud up to his knees and a bandana hanging loose around his neck. "Uncle," he called, breathless. The roan moray got loose again, ran straight for the creek. The man stood without a word. He reached for his hat on the coat rack, placed it on his head, and gave the piano one last glance. Then he looked at me. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't bravado, just acknowledgement. Like he saw something in me and decided not to look away. He tipped his hat, then followed the boy out without another word. gone as fast as he'd appeared. The silence in the saloon held a beat longer. One of the ranch hands muttered something about fancy airs and poured another drink, but I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs were jelly, my throat tight. I'd heard that piece before when I was little. My mother used to hum it while brushing my hair, back when there was still softness in the world. Before men started showing up at the door with promises and fists, that song was the sound of my old life. The life I'd buried under layers of fabric and silence. The bartender cleared his throat near me. Ain't heard anyone touch that piano in years. I didn't respond. I just stood, slid my cup forward, and walked out before my hands started shaking. The wind had picked up. Dust swirled down the main street like restless ghosts. I tucked my hair under my bonnet and made my way back to the cramped room above. The seamstress shop, my shoes crunching gravel with every step. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, listening to the floorboards creak under strangers' feet downstairs. I couldn't stop hearing those notes, the way they hung in the air flawed. Fragile, full of memory. I wanted to forget them. I tried. But they stayed. They stayed with me through breakfast, through mending sleeves, through biting my tongue when Miss Geneva made another comment about my solitary tendencies. I told myself it didn't matter. He was just a man. Music didn't mean anything. But every night after, I found myself looking toward the saloon as I walked home, hoping for the sound of piano, listening for that ghost melody. Nothing came. Still, I waited. And that's how it starts, isn't it? Not with thunder, but with a note barely heard that refuses to leave you alone. The days blurred together in that gray way winter days do half-light in the mornings, lamps burning too early in the evenings. The seamstress shop stayed busy with ranch wives bringing in worn coats and men's shirts split at the seams. My hands stitched and patched on their own, but my mind kept drifting back to the piano. The first time I saw the boy again, it was a Tuesday. He appeared in the shop doorway, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of apples. "From Uncle," he said, like I was supposed to understand. He placed the bag on the counter, and, without waiting for thanks, pulled a folded scrap of paper from his pocket. It was music. Handwritten in careful ink, but only a fragment, maybe 10 measures long. The notes stopped mid-phrase, like someone had run out of breath. I stared at it long after the boy left. The paper was creased, edges soft from being handled. I tucked it into my apron pocket and told myself it was just a kindness, that it didn't mean anything. A week later, he came again, this time with a shirt, the cuff torn clean through. "Uncle says he'll pick it up in a couple days," the boy said. Another scrap of music appeared from his pocket again, incomplete. Again familiar in a way I couldn't quite name. I started looking forward to his visits, though I tried not to. The sound of his boots on the stairs. The way he never lingered, never asked questions, just delivered what he came to deliver. Some nights, when the lamps were low and the rest of the town was asleep, I laid the scraps out on my narrow table, side by side, in no particular order, like puzzle pieces. The ink was the same. The handwriting was steady, deliberate. Whoever wrote it wanted it to be read, or maybe heard. One evening, I pulled the old sewing stool close to the window and looked down at the street. Snow flurries danced under the lamplight. In the distance, I thought I heard the faintest trace of piano, too far away to be sure. My heart did that thing again, that uneven thump like it was deciding whether to leap or hide. By the third visit, I'd stopped pretending. I waited for the boy. I folded the music scraps carefully, smoothed them with my palm. I began to wonder if I was supposed to play them, but the only instrument in my possession was my mother's broken harmonium, which hadn't made a sound since the war. Still, the scraps stayed on my table. I could have thrown them away, should have, but each time my fingers brushed that paper, it was like the sound of that first day in the saloon came rushing back soft, imperfect, alive, and even if I couldn't admit it out loud, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was keeping them. The harvest supper was always the same. A long row of tables on the edge of town, covered in gingham and chipped pottery. Pumpkin pies, roasted corn, venison stew. Everyone pretending the cold hadn't already crept into their bones. Children ran wild, men drank like it was medicine, and the women huddled in tight circles, their laughter sharp as knitting needles. I hadn't planned on going, but Miss Geneva insisted I show face, as she put it, reminding me that a woman without friends is a woman with enemies. I wore the nicest thing. I had a dark skirt and a wool shawl, and kept to the edges, where the lanterns flickered low and the air didn't smell so much like judgment. I didn't expect to see him there. He sat at the far end, a plate untouched. In front of him, speaking only to the boy who'd brought me the music scraps. They looked like family, but not by blood, more like people who'd survived something together. He wasn't laughing, wasn't performing, just observing. Then someone called his name. I never caught it and pushed him toward the piano. It had been dragged out onto the makeshift stage, dusted off for the occasion. He resisted at first, shook his head, but the boy tugged at his sleeve, and after a pause he stood. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't introduce himself. He just sat, adjusted the bench, and began to play It was Chopin again, slower this time. Like the notes had aged, deepened. His fingers moved like he was trying not to wake something sleeping inside him. Each chord landed soft but steady, like snowfall on a roof. I was halfway through my cup of cider when I felt them watching me dot the women. They stood in a semicircle behind the dessert table, whispering behind gloved hands. I caught bits and pieces. She lives alone, you know. No husband, not even a cousin. She dares to stand there and listen like she earned it. I swallowed hard, kept my face still, but shame bloomed in my chest like fire in dry grass. My instinct was to leave, to disappear into the shadows and let them have their victory. But then I heard footsteps. He was walking toward me, still carrying the echo of that last note like a halo. He held a plate spaghetti, of all things, and stopped right beside me. He didn't say a word, just handed me the plate, then sat down next to me on the low stone wall where I'd been hiding from the world. That gesture, quiet, unassuming, spoke louder than any defense I could have made. The whispers dried up. The women turned away, their smiles too sweet, too slow. We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. I ate spaghetti with a wooden fork, my hands trembling slightly. He didn't watch me, just looked out over the crowd like none of it mattered. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving a room. I felt like I'd been given permission to stay in it. By December, the snow had settled deep along the rooftops, turning the whole town into something muffled and still. The seamstress shop stayed cold no matter how much we fed the stove, so I worked in gloves with the fingertips cut off, breath clouding the air above each seam. One morning the boy appeared again, cheeks red from the wind. He didn't bother stepping inside, just stood in the doorway with that same mix of shyness and certainty I'd come to recognize. From his coat pocket he pulled another scrap of music. This one had a single word written under the staff, in neat, deliberate letters, soon. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the faint indent of the pen stroke. My voice almost cracked when I asked, "What soon?" He only shrugged. "Uncle says you'll know." The next day he was back this time with no music. just a small envelope. Inside was a piece of paper torn from a ledger, scrawled with an invitation in that same steady handwriting. Supper, Thursday, 7. Beneath it, in smaller letters, spaghetti. I stood there with the paper in my hand long. After he'd left, my needle frozen mid-stitch. I'd had meals with people before, but not like this. Not an invitation that felt chosen. Meant. Thursday came and I almost didn't go. I told myself I was too tired, that it was too cold, that I didn't have the right dress. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to be welcomed instead of tolerated. The boy met me halfway down the snowy lane and led me toward the small ranch on the edge of town. Warm light spilled from the windows. The smell of garlic and tomatoes met me before. The door even opened inside. It was nothing like I expected. Modest, yes, but warm in a way the shop never was. The walls lined with shelves full of books, a cast-iron stove humming in the corner, and in the center a table already set for 3. He served the spaghetti himself, a little awkwardly, as if unsure how to host. We ate mostly in silence, the kind where no one's counting how many words they've spoken. The boy told a story about chasing the roan mare again, and we laughed, not the polite kind, but the kind that takes you by surprise. Afterward, I helped clear the plates. He didn't protest, just handed me a dish towel, our hands brushing once, quick as a heartbeat. When I stepped back into the cold, I realized something strange. I was full, yes, but not just from the food. It had been years since I'd felt that kind of fullness, the kind you carry home with you. The night of the fire, I woke to shouting. At first I thought it was some late night drunk down on the street, but then I smelled it, smoke, thick and bitter, seeping through the cracks in the floorboards. By the time I pulled my skirt on, the seamstress shop below was already half swallowed by flame. The walls glowed like the inside of a furnace, and the air was so hot it felt like it could peel the skin from my face. I grabbed for my shawl, but my hand landed on something else, my small bundle of music scraps tied with twine. It was the only thing I took. Someone was pounding on the door. When I opened it, he was there. Not the boy, him. Hatless, coat thrown on over his shirt, eyes steady, despite the smoke curling around us. He didn't waste time with questions, just reached for my arm and pulled me into the stairwell. The cold hit me like a slap when we burst. Outside, sparks swirled into the night sky like angry stars. Townsfolk were forming a line from the well, tossing buckets in a desperate rhythm that already felt too slow. I looked back once. My room, everything I'd owned, was gone. The narrow bed, the few dresses, my mother's thimble. All that was left was heat and ruin. He didn't let me linger. We crossed the street, boots slipping on ice, until we reached his horse tied. Up near the hitching post, the boy was already there, holding the reins, eyes wide and wet. "She's coming with us," he said to the boy, like there was never any question. I didn't protest. Not because I couldn't speak, though my throat felt raw from the smoke, but because I didn't want to. The ride out of town was silent except for the creak of leather and the horse's steady breathing. Snow began to fall again, slow and heavy, dampening the smell of burning that clung to my clothes. When we reached the ranch, he swung down first, then offered his hand. I took it, feeling the solid strength of his grip, wordless assurance that I was, at least for tonight, safe. Inside, the stove was already lit. The boy brought me a blanket, and I sat near the fire while they moved quietly around me, heating water, setting out a mug of tea, not asking for explanations, not offering pity. When the mug warmed my hands, I looked down at the bundle of Chopin scraps in my lap. Smoke-stained now, edges curling from the heat. They were all I had left, and Somehow that felt like the start of something, not the end. Life at the ranch settled into a rhythm so steady it felt almost foreign to me. Mornings were for feeding the stock, breaking ice in the water troughs, and hauling wood in from the shed. Afternoons were quiet mending tack, peeling potatoes, listening to the wind creak against the eaves. Nights we'd sit by the stove, the boy bent over his schoolwork, me with a bit of sewing, and him always near the piano. At first he didn't play. He'd run his fingers along the keys, maybe test a chord, but nothing more. I didn't push. I'd learned long ago that asking too many questions can close a person up tighter than winter ground. Night, I woke to the sound of halting music. I followed it down the narrow hallway, bare feet silent on the worn wood. He was at the piano, shoulders curved inward, hands slow and deliberate. The Chopin again, but rougher now, as if each note was a stone he had to lift before setting it down. I stepped closer. "You've been practicing," I said softly. He didn't startle, just kept his eyes on the keys. "Used to play it for someone," he murmured. "Long time ago. I didn't need to ask who." His voice carried that quiet grief that comes when the loss is old but still sharp in certain places. "I never got it right," he said after a moment. "Not the way they deserved to hear it." I sat beside him on the bench. My skirt brushed against his knee. "My mother taught me a song once," I said. "Not Chopin, something simpler." I placed my fingers on the keys, and for the first time in years I played a soft, steady melody that didn't ask for perfection, only presence. The kind of tune you could hum while mending a tear or stirring a pot. When I finished, the silence between us felt full, not empty. He turned to me then, eyes steady, and spoke without hesitation. "Marry me." It wasn't a grand proposal. Number. Kneeling, no ring. Just 3 words, plain as bread, offered like they'd been waiting for a place to land. I could have laughed, could have asked what he thought he was getting into, could have said no, but instead I just looked at him. The man who'd pulled me from fire without asking why I was alone, who'd left music on scraps of paper like breadcrumbs, who'd never once demanded more than I was willing to give. "Yes," I said, and that was it. No celebration, no witnesses, just a quiet agreement, sealed in the dim light of a ranch house, with the piano between us and the smell of wood smoke in the air. Snow was falling again, the kind that hushes the whole world. We sat at the piano together that evening, the boy curled up in a chair by the stove, his head drooping as sleep pulled at him. The lamp cast a warm circle of light over the keys, over our hands resting side by side. I'd been meaning to give him back the bundle of music scraps, thinking they belonged more to him than me. But when I untied the twine and spread them across the piano lid, I saw something I hadn't before. The last piece one I hadn't noticed in the confusion after the fire was there among them. A complete score, every note in place, dot and under. The final bar in the same deliberate handwriting. "Stay." I traced a word with my finger, feeling its weight. This wasn't a flourish or a poet's trick. It was a choice, a simple request, a promise tucked into a single syllable. He saw me reading it, and instead of explaining, he began to play. The full piece, all of it, from beginning to end. No hesitations now, no missing measures. The sound filled the little room, spilling into the corners like warmth itself. I leaned against him as he played, my shoulder fitting into the space beneath his. Our fingers met briefly on the keys, his touch firm and steady, mine light as breath. Outside, the snow thickened, erasing the world beyond the windows. When the last note faded, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. I thought of all the places I'd been, All the rooms I'd left before anyone could push me out. The years of keeping my bag half-packed, of holding myself apart because it was safer than belonging. And here I was, not owned, not beholden, just home. He closed the piano lid and covered my hand with his. We sat like that while the fire burned low, the boys breathing slow, and even in the corner. The snow kept falling. I stayed.